Chapter 2. Game Within a Game. Amos didn't want to join the game with Barrett. Instead, he sat at a bar in Aquila City, listening to his music while he watched the feed on the monitor. As much as he liked it, he couldn't fully surrender to his new life. It was now 8 months since the incident at the mine. With each passing week, his agreement with Smalley tugged at him more and more. Amos wasn't fool enough to think he had slipped those hooks. True enough, Constellation was a small group. Most didn't even know who they were. But after finding the fourth artifact, word had gotten out. Farmers to grifters now contacted him about strange metal sheets. Contacting him. Amos laughed under his breath. "Keep a low profile and be forgettable," he said in Smalley's voice. "So much for that," Amos spat, as he downed the dregs of his beer. Now that he and Barrett discovered that strange structure, everything changed. After he went through the ring, Amos could do things. He could affect the physical by touching the quantum. Tomorrow, he and Barrett were due to head to a moon that had similar anomalies to Procyon 3. Amos wanted there to be another ring. Each time he had those visions, more things were added. Like reading a book, one random page at a time. And it felt good. Really good. He actually felt giddy after the last one. It reminded him of what it was like to wake from a dream, floating in brief amnesia, before his mind caught up and remembered the pain of the previous day. He was finishing his meal when he heard Barrett hoot, and then offer an apology. Amos shook his head. Barrett was so likable the others actually sounded happy he took the pot. He had just cleared his tab when a woman sat on the stool next to him. She was pretty, in her early 30s. Her utilitarian clothes were new, but dusty. Short blue hair framed a brown face with fine laugh lines around her light green eyes. So they were augmented. Amos wondered if she had other modifications when she caught him staring. As he turned away, he glanced at her boots. Shoes, actually. The type a runner would wear so as not to slip on hard surfaces. After she took a drag of her whiskey, she looked at the news. Staring at the images, she raised her hands in a helpless gesture and incredulously announced to no one in particular, "Nothing interesting since the hanging of the butcher's bill." She looked over at Amos and said, "You know, I heard it was old Smalley himself that ordered it to be done on Mars. Yikes, the fat one lasted for what, 8 minutes? Man, that guy's made it his own personal crusade to go after pirates any chance he gets." Downing the rest of her whiskey, she thoughtfully mused, "Knowin' Jack, I bet he keeps his own little projects off the books." Each sentence made Amos's stomach twist. She ordered 2 more whiskeys, then slid one over to him and said in a softer tone, "Here, friend, you look like you need it." Amos knew he shouldn't drink it. He needed to keep his wits about him. He downed it anyway. Her eyes flicked over Amos's shoulder, and as quick as that, her demeanor changed to flirtatious. She laughed at an unspoken joke and took Amos by the hands. She called over to where Barrett was sitting and, with mischief in her voice, loudly announced, "I'm going to borrow your friend for a few hours. I'll try to keep him in one piece." As the group laughed and whistled, she pulled Amos out the door. The clear night air of Aquila City was crisp and bit a little. That suited Amos fine. He felt more alert. Once they rounded the corner, she gestured toward the west wall and said, "Come along, Amos. Don't you want to take this girl for a moonlit stroll?" He stopped and stared angrily at her. How dare she be so flippant? The woman turned and took in his face. She rolled her eyes and sighed. "Be happy you got 2 extra months out of the deal. I needed that time to get the new you properly seated. Now let's go and get you briefed. In a week, you'll either be Crimson Fleet or dead. And Jack's adamant that I get you in with your background intact." On top of the wall, Amos gazed at the moonlit fields surrounding the city. He could see movement off in the distance and wondered if it was a terror morph. He looked back and saw the woman's face backlit by the tablet she was working on. He hadn't noticed it before, but there was a tattoo of a spider on the left side of her neck, with what looked like strands reaching out in different directions, some under her clothes. "Who are you?" "What's your name?" he asked. She glanced up. "Pella," then went back to work. Amos thought about that for a minute. He looked at her tattoo again, and it clicked. "That's an interesting tattoo you have, Pella," he stated, while punctuating the name. She paused for several breaths and looked up at him. "You're not the only one who chose a new name, Amos," she said, also punctuating the name. She made a last few taps and said, "Let me see your watch." Amos pulled back his jacket sleeve and waved it back and forth. "Give me your watch," she said a bit too calmly. Amos removed it and tossed it to her. "What's the matter, Pella? Are you not enjoying your moonlit stroll?" She took the watch and tethered it to her tablet, using a hard line. A few more taps to her screen and she was finished. She walked over to Amos, took his arm and slowly put the chronomark on him. She looked directly into his eyes. "I am," she said sarcastically. "I've been wanting to meet the man who caught the Admiral's eye so much so that he poured his own resources into this project. Jack's never been one to put all his eggs in one basket, but he has with you." Stepping away, she looked toward the city and the few lights still on. "Let's go for that walk," she said. "I used what I could from the info you gave, Lynn," Pella said, as they walked along the perimeter of the wall. "It's risky keeping your first name, but I get it. You are Amos McClay, small-time smuggler, that happened upon some intel that could get you into the big—" "You don't seem very Navy," Amos interrupted. "Navy?" Pella scoffed, stopped, and turned to face him. "I've seen UC officers in you," Amos said with a bite. "I imagined you would be more—" "More what, Amos?" she said eagerly. Struggling to find the right word, for there were so many, he finally said, "Appropriate." Mouth agape, Pella looked as if she couldn't believe it. "Appropriate," she scoffed. "What do you think this is? I'll tell you what it's not, Amos Huckabee. It's not a legal UC operation. This thing is so off the books that if the higher-ups find out what Smalley is doing, even he will be quietly retired and then disappear." She abruptly started to walk again, and Amos was forced to follow. Without warning, she stopped, and Amos bumped into her. He didn't know why, but she was really triggered. "So what does that make me?" she asked impatiently. Amos smiled as he answered innocently. "Not appropriate." He expected violence, but instead Pella blew a laugh out of her nose, then took in a slow breath. "Thank you," she said, the tension still there. "I've never spent so much time preparing for one person. I normally dance among the webs of important and dangerous people, but I was told to drop all my other projects, good ones, and work on your suicide mission. It's been mind-numbing." "So yeah," Pella said tiredly. "I'm not Navy. I'm Smalley's little secret. He's always played his own game, and I rigged the board for him." "How long have you known him?" Amos asked. "That's a personal question," she said reprovingly. "Ask another one." He thought for a moment and replied, "Even if this is not a legal operation, the goal is to get intel on the Crimson Fleet. How would that getting out retire the Admiral?" "Get ready for it, then," she said seriously. "The answer's even hard for me to stomach, and you will be in the middle of it." Pella looked at the city below. "Let's walk for this next part. No one should overhear enough to piece it together." Amos was puzzled, so he asked, "All right. But if this is so sensitive, why not get a room somewhere?" "Because we don't need to," she shot back. "This is what I do." Triggered, Amos thought. It must have shown on his face, for after what looked like some kind of inner debate, Pella admitted, "Besides, I've been cooped up working on this for far too long. I don't want to be trapped in another room even briefly if I can help it." After walking a short distance, Pella began. All I'll explain is nestled neatly in your chrono mark, so don't worry about remembering everything. In 5 days, the download will erase. Within a week, if it stops picking up your vitals, the whole watch will burn up. What if I take it off before then? He asked as he fiddled with its band. She looked at him as if he was in kindergarten. Don't, she said slowly. You are Amos McClay, a nobody smuggler who has intel to sell to the Crimson Fleet. How did you get it, you may ask? You will happen upon a UC ship suffering systems failure. This ship, the Adeline, is transporting a UC agent set to infiltrate the Crimson Fleet. You are to offer aid and kill everyone on that ship. That's an important detail that you can't deviate. There should only be 5 crew plus the operative. As you scavenge... Kill? Amos blurted out. Looking for a way out, he said, why kill? Why not give me the intel? Better yet, why not make me the mole? Pella stopped again and patted him on the cheek. She said almost tenderly, Oh, Amos, you're not listening. We don't work for the UC. We work for a powerful man who doesn't follow the rules, because rules get in the way of change and bog down progress. Her voice now shifted to one of resolve. Rules, laws, they are made by the powerful to serve the powerful. And if the little people benefit along the way, well, that's just a happy coincidence, because when they get in the way, they are crushed. Jack's got grit enough to not be hamstrung by bureaucracy. Don't get me wrong, he's more devil than saint, but he ends up helping more people in the long run, and I can live with that. Are you trying to convince me or yourself of that? Amos asked. Ignoring the question, she continued. The crew you will eliminate, and that's the least of it. The intel that will get you to Crimson Fleet leader, Durante, has the names of 17 agents that Commander Ikande has seeded into their fleet. Jack doesn't want scraps, he wants meat, and he's willing to sacrifice those people to fast-track you to the top. So, if you screw it up, all those deaths will be for nothing. Amos was breathing hard, looking at the ground. They stood there in silence. Then a watchman hollered from some distance away, Get a room, you two. Amos was first to break the silence, his voice gravelly. Do I have to remember that last bit, or is it on the watch? Pella leaned against the parapet and slid down to a sitting position. Amos sat down next to her, but out of arm's reach. They both looked ahead, not making eye contact. You know, she said, I read your original report, the one that got wiped. I know you get it. You made the hard decisions knowing you would suffer for it. Why? Because it was the right thing to do, he stated. Pella expected this. Wrong, she said. Amos jerked. She went right on anyway. You might have told yourself that to deal with the guilt, but you did not do the right thing. You euthanized those women without their consent. You took it upon yourself to decide who lived and who died. Not for the greater good, but for a lesser evil. You decided to ignore not only the laws of society, but the laws of what makes us human. By doing so, you became a lesser evil that those women needed to be spared from a terrible fate. Amos was nodding his head. You don't know the whole story. Pella breathed in deep and said, I was the one to choose the Adeline. Jack gave the order for the transport, but I picked the ship. I knew that there had to be a blood trail for this all to stick. Durante has his own informants too, you know. She wrapped her arms around her legs and rested her head on her knees. You want to know why I picked that one? Not waiting for a response, she continued. Because it was first on the list. I was tired and didn't care because they all had rotating crews. But guess what I found out? Pella didn't answer her question. Instead, she said, most of the people I've killed, or gotten killed, the worlds were better off. The high and mighty that are replaced as soon as they are gone. Nobody really misses them, and sometimes it's led to a shift that resulted in some good. But this thing? I don't know what Jack's endgame is. He won't tell me. I'm trapped in this web as sure as you are. Amos spoke. "When I'm in, won't you be back to your other projects?" "I'm your only handler on this," she said. "At least I'm done with the desk. I'll be keeping close, greasing the wheels. We will meet to debrief periodically." Amos looked at his watch and assumed she could track it now. "Do you want to hear about your ship?" Pella asked more lightly. Amos had wondered about that. "So I won't be using the frontier?" Laughing a little, she replied, "No, you'll have to scuttle the ship. Make it look like you went down with it. The good news is I got you a good smuggler ship. It's not top of the line. You are small time, remember? But it has it where it counts. Shielded cargo holds and fast engines." They spent the next 30 minutes going over Amos's background and history. Another 40 minutes reviewing the Crimson Fleet's chain of command and personality profiles on key members. Pella saved the week's timeline, ship routes, and equipment for last. It was midnight by the time they finished. "Any questions?" Pella asked. "I think I got it. Plus I have this," Amos said as he tapped his watch. "Will I have any way to contact you?" "For right now, you don't need to," she said. "This first phase is pretty straightforward. Get close to Durante. Be invaluable to him. As far as Jack is concerned, any intel you glean is just bonus. I suspect he wants to be able to influence Durante, maybe even replace him." Amos was incredulous. "With me?" "Maybe," Pella said. "It's the sort of thing he does, that I do for him. He has people all over who he basically owns. I've been able to pave the way for most of them to be in influential positions in both the United Colonies and Free Star Collective. He has yet to get someone high up in the Crimson Fleet." "Does he own you?" Amos asked. "That's another personal question," she replied lightly. "I'll tell you what. I have some questions of my own. How about a trade? 5 for 5. Amos thought about it. He didn't like this type of game, but they were going to be working together. The more of her he knew, the better. And then there's... "Okay, let's do it," he said. "Okay," she said eagerly. "Since you asked the first one." Amos stopped her. "Why don't you do first?" Amos thought that if he took the black piece, it would give him an advantage. He always did better by watching the first move. She looked at him appraisingly. "Sure, Amos." Pella knew what he was doing, and it invigorated her. This was a game she was adept at. Still sitting against the wall, she turned to face him and took the first move. "What's your favorite color?" she asked with a grin. So much for that, he thought. He was going to follow with a big one. Now he had to follow suit. Now she would determine the value of each question going forward. "Black," he said, as if it was always that. "Good," Pella thought. "He's decided to play along." She nodded. Amos's turn. "What is your favorite spice?" Pella wouldn't lie, even though he surely did. It was a good question. He was a cook after all. "Anardana," she answered. Amos' brows rose and he nodded with a grin. He knew of it, but it was rare. That should be useful. Pella's move. "What happened on Vectera so that Argos ended your contract on day 1, only to immediately get recruited by Constellation?" "I found a very old artifact," he said. "Constellation is collecting them." Pella pointed at him and wagged her finger. "Not the whole truth, Amos. I know you found something. Lynn said you passed out and she overheard Barrett talking to you about hallucinations." Amos said, "I told you why my contract ended and how I got a new job." Pella smiled at that and gestured he continue. Amos was going out on a limb, but if he was right, how long have you lived in the settled systems? Pella had gone too easy on him, but that question also told her something about him. He wasn't just lucky all those years on the butcher's bill. To last as long as he did, he took risks, but very calculated ones. 18, she said. 18, Amos repeated musingly. He struck platinum with that one. She immediately followed to change the subject. Your report ended with this question, but no answer. Why did you put yourself on the line all those years? Such a thing is rarely done out of benevolence. Amos was surprised. Smalley hadn't told her. That question told him something about the Admiral. He would have to think on that later. Penance is all he said. She was clearly irritated. Obviously, Amos. That's so obvious. You didn't answer my question. What are you penitent for? What did you do? He responded smugly. Is that your next question? If it has to be, yes. She responded impatiently. And that was your next one, too. So it was. I caused the deaths of a lot of people, including women and children, he said steely. How many? She asked. And yes, that's my last question. She had him, Amos knew. Had she suspected from the beginning? Eyes rimmed in red, he stared dead at her. 231. 231, Pella whispered to herself. She suspected, but had to be sure. Jack provided her with the video of Amos's interrogation. Part of it. It cut just after Amos whispered something. Amos's head was turned down, but Jack's wasn't. His lips moved just as the recording stopped. She worked with that, and it looked like he mouthed Narrated. 231, the number of the entire colony brutalized and tortured on Narrated 7. A raid for loot and slaves that all of a sudden turned psychotic. She watched only some of the CCTV footage. Jack's capture of the monster's crew is what started his rise through the ranks. Seeing a rare opportunity, the council voted to break protocol and send him support. Pella was fast-tracked through her last semester and sent to UC Space to assist Jack's rise in power. She was 17 years old. She looked at the hardened man sitting before her and understood why Jack finally believed he could reach his talons into the Crimson Fleet. If Amos could elude the manhunt and live among his peers without them knowing of him, not to mention running his own secret operation. So Pella changed her mind. With her help, this wouldn't be a suicide mission after all. Amos took a ragged breath. That was 5. I have 2 more. I'll just hold on to those. She didn't really like that, but deep down, she wanted someone other than Jack to talk to. Sure, Amos, she said. Make them count. They walked back to the corner that led to Amos's hotel. Before they parted, Pella said, Here. I almost forgot. She handed him some wireless earbuds. Your Walkman and headphones are too much the old you. These are tethered to your chronomark. You can now listen with it. Thank you, Amos said. Actually, Pella said, let me see your watch for a second. Amos raised his arm for her. She connected it to her tablet and, after a few taps, disconnected. That's for you. If you survive the next week, it will unlock. Maybe I'll just change the date, Amos smirked. I would really advise against that, she said mockingly. Amos turned to go, then Pella said, Wait, one last thing. As he turned back around, she had closed the gap, grabbed his jaw and shoulder, then bit hard into his neck. Amos swore and pushed her away. Hand to his neck, he yelled, What was that for? I think it's bleeding. Pella hushed him. Keep your voice down. It's not bleeding. Remember, Barrett saw my face, and in 2 days you are going down with your ship. When Constellation mourns one of its own, Barrett mustn't remember me as anything other than a one-night stand. It's for his protection, too. She ran her tongue over her teeth. Oh yeah, it was bleeding. Amos thought it was unnecessary, but he saw some logic in it. Only some. Okay, he breathed out. I guess I'll see you around, Pella. Only if you survive the next month, she said, jabbing a finger at him to emphasize the point. With a crooked smile, he said, I ain't dying until I use my last 2 questions. 3 days later, Amos undocked from the Adeline. Inside, the drifting ship remained one lone survivor fast asleep. An hour earlier, He boarded to help with repairs and got permission to bring Vasco aboard to carry the supplies. When they both were in position, Amos gave the signal and they opened fire. He found the last crew member, the officer, hiding in a bin. When Vasco ripped the lid off, Amos shouted for him to stand down. Inside was a frightened woman, and he recognized her. It was the lieutenant that was assigned to Smalley the night of Amos's capture. This couldn't be a coincidence. The Admiral was eliminating a loose end. What was her name? Samantha. "Please," she whimpered. "I'm pregnant. Please." Gesturing for Vasco to step back, Amos holstered his weapon and told her to get out. He was furious, and it showed. The woman, Sally was her name, shrank back, shaking. In as calm a voice as he could muster, Amos asked, "Sally, does the Admiral know you are pregnant?" "What?" she said, confused. "Does Admiral Smalley know you are pregnant?" this time grinding his teeth. Yes, she stammered. "This was my last assignment before my maternity leave. The Admiral assigned me here himself." Amos was sure she didn't recognize him. She was in shock, and he was covered in blood. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, "but you have to stay here. I have to get something. Vasco, watch her." Amos knew to never underestimate the maternal instinct. This Sally, as broken as she was capable of anything. There was a small kitchenette on his ship. He gathered his herbs and mixed the same tea he gave Tayan back on the butcher's bill. He spent a few more minutes at his desk and returned to the Adeline with 2 cups. Sally had moved and was sitting on the end of a lower bunk. She was wearing a jacket zipped up to the neck. Amos took a knee. "Okay, Sally," he began. "Here's the deal. You were assigned on the Adeline to be executed at Jack Smalley's order, but I'm going to save you and your baby's life. This tea," he gestured with one of the cups, "is the same I gave that girl on the Oasis of the Stars." Sally's eyes widened in recognition. "The reason Jack wants you killed is because of what you overheard at my interrogation. If you drink this, you will forget this whole mess." She reached for the cup, but Amos pulled it back. "Jack will know what I did, and you will be safe for a while. But he will come after you again. So I want you to drink this instead." Amos handed her the other cup. "This is a similar blend that will just knock you out cold. You should still be out by the time rescue comes. This is what they will find." Amos swirled the dregs of the other cup. "And Jack will know what I supposedly did." Plus, Amos didn't know how the other tea would affect the baby. Sally's eyes were closed tight. She was holding herself and rocking back and forth. Amos knew he went too fast, but he was running high on adrenaline. "Now for your part, Sally." "Sally," he repeated. She refocused on his face. "To save your baby, you need to fake amnesia. Jack has to be convinced you never saw me. When they debrief you, can you convince them that you remember nothing?" She looked around, her head moving jerkily. She began to cry. "I don't think I can." He put his hand on her shoulder and in an understanding tone said, "Hey, that's okay. I figured as much. So I have this for you, too." He handed her a pack of gum. "There are 5 pieces left, so use them only when you need them. It's laced with a mild tranquilizer. Take it a few minutes before the official debrief and any time the Admiral wants to talk to you alone. It will calm you way down. They will expect you to be in shock at finding out what happened, so being zoned out won't be suspicious. When you're clear, I want you to go on your maternity leave. I don't have the leverage to bargain with the Admiral, but I have a friend who will be relieved that you're safe." Amos was sure Pella knew about Sally, and that was the thing she found out. It makes sense why Pella was so conflicted about a rotating crew. He continued, "I'm confident that by answering any questions she has, she will be more than willing and able to relocate you and your family to where the Admiral cannot reach you." Sally spoke, her voice more stable. "If it was anyone else." She looked at the cup and then at him. "But you? I believe you." He had her repeat this all back to him 3 times until he was satisfied. Sally drank the tea. After a deep breath, she held on to her belly and said, "Thank you." After her breathing evened out, Amos retrieved her mug and placed the other one next to the bunk. He then gathered the data stick Pella had planted. Before he left, Amos went to the bridge. He opened the book he retrieved from his desk and with a marker began to write on the bridge's viewport. Sometime later, in response to an anonymous tip, UC Marines stormed the Adeline. The only surviving member of the crew was its officer, who was jolted awake by the commotion. As the team's commander and medic were checking on her, they heard a call from the bridge. "Commander, you should come and see this." She left the medic to his task. When she reached the bridge, half the squad had gathered and more were filing in. There, on the center viewport, were written in large red letters, "It's hard to imagine a more dangerous way of making decisions than in putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong." Intended for Smalley, Amos underestimated the impact it would have on those soldiers. And soldiers talk.
Here's to the greater good for all. Do what you know you should for all. We all may die. Something's going on, just look around. Fear is on the rise, and there's blood all over the ground. Let's all just blindfold the poor. We must remind them what's in store. We got them now, just break them down a little bit more. Said, hey, you feed the machine, bring them all back down to their knees. No time to waste. Remind the slaves, they ain't gonna make it out alive today. I said, hey, you poison the well, watch it all burn, take him straight to hell. He's got the whole world in his hands. It was nice to know you. We've all been damned, come on. Nothing's going on, no need to fear. And we're all in this together. And just to make it all clear, we want the same thing as you. This will all be over soon. Now here's a little pill, here's the truth. We're gonna, we're gonna, we're gonna, we're gonna, we're gonna, we're gonna, we're all gonna die. You feed the machine, bring them all back down to their knees. No time to waste. Remind the slaves, they ain't gonna make it out alive today. I said, hey, you poison the well, watch it all burn, take him straight to hell. He's got the whole world in his hands. It was nice to know you. We've all been damned, come on. Come on, come on, come on, come on. We've all been damned, come on. Said, hey, you feed the machine, bring them all back down to their knees. No time to waste. Remind the slaves, they ain't gonna make it out alive today. I said, hey, you poison the well, watch it all burn, take him straight to hell. He's got the whole world in his hands. It was nice to know you.